Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and I'm joined tonight by Colin Watt for an impromptu 6 o'clock Friday night live show. Colin, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. Wasn't expecting this. We were setting up for the state of Scottish football to preview the Scottish Cup fixtures this weekend, and then, as always, ScotFail lets us down. So good luck to Dave on his way home, who was going to be joining us this evening. But why talk about all 8 games when we can just talk about the one that's the most important one, Paul?
Well, I was thinking you were on Wednesday on your usual slot, Colin, so you've not had an opportunity actually to react to the Aberdeen game, so we'll do a bit of that. And we'll look ahead to the Wraith Rovers match on Sunday as well, and basically where we are overall. But, I mean, let's start off with the Aberdeen game then, because you spoke about it prior to the game. You've not had an opportunity to get stuck into that analysis. What was your view overall about that? I was listening with interest to Tony and Laura today and Alan, and Tony basically said, we go to Pittodrie, we get the 3 points, we come down the road, all is good. To be honest with you, I'm quite happy with that, personally. We can strip away the performance, as we always do on the show anyway, Colin, and We've done a few times already. But what was your take on it? I mean, were you at any point concerned? Did you think we weren't going to pull it back when it was 2 each to get the win?
I mean, concerned is... do you know what? The worst bit is not being there. I was unfortunate not to make it, but my pal was there, so I knew what was happening ahead of time. It goes back to why we stopped...
Who's your pal, JP?
No. Well, I had plenty. I was going to say plenty. I had a good few Celtic pals there. Including quite a few of the people on the team here at Celtic State of Mind, although don't let other people hear that, because podcasters, we're not meant to go to the games, we sit in our dark dwellings and just give our own opinions. No, it was finding out ahead of time what was happening before you got to see it. I was watching on Red TV. I don't know what you guys were watching on.
Yeah, we were also watching it on the legal stream, Colin.
Oh, the legal one, sorry, yeah. We'll talk more about that later on. But being like a minute behind, my pal Michael was texting me, and he's like, 2-1, 2 each. And at that point, it felt as if it was like a Celtic away day in Europe. We kind of concede one, and then our backside collapses, and within a couple of minutes, we're either equal or we're behind. And the way it was going, that's the way it sort of felt for a period. Celtic then got themselves back into it. It was good to see the sort of instant quick reaction from Jota, and the hurrah about his goal was just, it's fantastical. I mean, it's ridiculous the way that they keep going on about it. It seems as if the only way that Celtic can win is if there's a dodgy decision these days, never mind the ones that go against other teams, but hey-ho. I was on the boys from the Aberdeen podcast that do State of Scottish Football, the Red Tinted Glasses. I was on with those boys earlier in the week, and we sort of laid out how we thought the game was going to go. And if we had a bet builder on, we'd have took home some amount of money. We predicted 1 goal in it. We predicted a Lewis Ferguson goal. We predicted Jota to tear apart Calvin Ramsey, which he did. We predicted that Celtic would concede from a set piece. It kind of went to plan, but that wasn't exactly how I thought it was going to go after 45 minutes. At 45 minutes, I was already thinking, right, let's get ahead to the next game, get a couple of boys off, get them rested. But Celtic, they've just not been able to put a 90-minute performance in now for a number of months. And I get what the likes of Tony and that's saying, get the points down the road, brilliant. It's all cup finals between now and the end of the season, but I would like to see us being a bit more comfortable and not having to go into that sort of, not panic mode as such, but a sort of like, right, we need to get something out of this despite being so far in front for the first 45 minutes.
A couple of things you brought up there. The first one being the 90-minute performance, so we'll talk about that as well. I've got a theory around it, not so much a theory, but an observation around it. But also the flag behind me is using that overused term, Ange ball, which we no longer use really, but this flag came to us from Australia. If anyone follows us on social media, you'll have seen the tweet earlier on today. So one of the most incredible things, Colin, and you've been involved with ACSOM for a long time, a number of years. You used to come to the studio over in the toll booth in Stirling. We did shows over there. Through the lockdown, it was big dial-ins without the visuals. Probably a good thing because you couldn't get your hair cut or anything, or maybe a bad thing, depending on who you go to. But we were speaking during that entire period about the growth of the channel, what we're going to do next, that whole planning, what happens when we come out of this lockdown. So what I find incredible doing a podcast that started off at a kitchen table with a couple of mics is how far and wide it can spread. So when you hear through a mutual friend, which is Neely Mockin from the Falkirk area, is that there's someone in Australia who thinks this is a cracking show. And that just, I'm not just saying this, that blows me away, mate, when you hear that people from all over the globe are tuning in. And we've got a few followers on Twitter who travel about, and there's people in Dubai and Amsterdam and further afield. So this particular flag was obviously made up. The Ange ball's been added, the ACSOM logo's been added. And I thought it was only right just to fire it up there this evening. This is an impromptu show. Someone is asking, where's Big Dave? Well, Dave couldn't make the other show, Sean, so he's pushed us into the ACSOM studio. I was here anyway. I says to Colin, well, why don't we just do a wee Friday night show? No one knows it's happening, so it might be viewed by accident. Let's have a wee preview, a weekend preview. And going back to your point, note about this Ange ball thing that we don't really use anymore, I was looking quite a bit today, in actual fact, around Ange's philosophy. And I know that when he comes in as someone who, I think that unless you had a particular knowledge, like Jared and the boys on the Australian Celtic podcast, or of Australian football, or a particular knowledge of Japanese football like Dan Horowitz, you might have been, I think, like myself, a wee bit misinformed, ill-informed. You didn't have enough information on the individual. And obviously, since he's come in, everybody who is involved in ACSOMs and every other Celtic platform has done their research. You've watched the videos, you've watched the interviews, Colin. We've spoken to people, and other pods have spoken to people who have worked with Ange. We've read the book and all this kind of stuff. But we've also spoken to him at the press conferences. And from his very earliest musings since coming to Celtic, he's spoken about this philosophy. It was named Ange Ball by someone. And what is that? What is Ange's philosophy? So 8 months down the line, what do you think Ange's footballing philosophy is?
Do you know what? It's plan A, and it's sticking to plan A. And when you talk about it, that almost sounds as if he's a bit naive, but he believes so much in the way that his plan works that he doesn't change it depending on who Celtic's playing. And we saw that we've got some scalpings for that this season in Europe, but we've also put in some particularly impressive performances where a lot of people had already written us off before the game had even kicked off. So that is a testament to the sort of style. And he always goes on about putting out a team that his dad would have enjoyed watching, because that's what he grew up with. Getting up early in the morning to watch Italian football or to watch French football or even football from England, and just being able to enjoy watching the game of football. And I think as much of us wants to win everything that we put ourselves into, we also want to do it in that sort of style, that Celtic way that people have been talking about for years and years, as Ridiculizer comes in to say as well. When you look at it, there's performances that have been particularly impressive this season. You go back to the start of the season, winning 6-0 against St Mirren and Dundee. Even the performance at Easter Road, that first 45 minutes, blowing them away 3-0 before half-time, it was outstanding. The performance at Tynecastle, there's been so many that we could speak about. And then there's other performances that we just either couldn't quite get over the line, or we've just got over the line. And you think back to the Livingston game where we missed the penalty in the last minute, or the Dundee United game where the goal actually goes in the last minute. Every single time that we've been there, it's not as if we've sat and said, this is boring football. Whether it be such a close game of football, whether it be such an open game of football, we've never once said we went to a game and went, I'm bored. That's the difference. The amount of times that we tried to watch, and obviously I know it's more difficult last season because we were stuck at home, we were on this platform, we were in different, well, where you were able to have 6 people in 6 households and all that nonsense. But it just wasn't the same. The amount of times last year I was just sitting on my phone, flicking through Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and keeping one eye on the game, because you kind of knew after 60 minutes Celtic had chucked it. They weren't going to try and attack. If they didn't get a goal in the first 20 minutes, it was going to be just another slog of a game. And part of that might be the fact that fans weren't in the ground. Was signs of that even under Neil Lennon's first couple of seasons as well, where some of the games were a very hard watch. This season, I can't think of many, if any, that I've said coming away from it, oh, do you know what? I don't fancy another 90 minutes of that again.
No, you're right. Now, I think this is interesting because Callum McGregor a couple of times suggested that there was no game plan last season, Colin. And this isn't an opportunity for us to go on about Lenny and what happened last season, but we are comparing where we were and where we are now, of course. Yeah. And I think there is a definite philosophy, there's a definite game plan. Like you say, Ridiculizer comes in. Ridiculizer loves the all-out attacking philosophy regardless of the opponent, venue or competition, because that is the Celtic way. I think you've got the Celtic way, you've got the Liverpool way, and often I wonder, what is that? Well, with Celtic, I think it's that famous Jock Stein quote, where you're playing when you've won the European Cup against the Catenaccio, which is the ultra defensive Inter Milan side, and you've done it playing free-flowing, rip-roaring, never boring football, as Tony Haggerty would say. Copyright. And that, for me, copyright, that's always been what we think is the Celtic way. But there's got to be substance as well over style. And we've spoken about some teams, and the famous Tommy Burns team, which I loved, where they only won one trophy. So it's about marrying the both, because you've got to have success as well as the style. And a few people are coming in, they're a bit puzzled as to why we're on at this time of night. I've just woke up. Imagine how confused I am to see ACSOM at 6 p.m. Well, I hope you enjoy it. In any case, it was a wee bit surprising to Colin as well, so he had to get his Celtic jersey on and get stuck in. Greg, we will make sure any merch that's been purchased over the last week or two will be with you before Valentine's Day, because obviously you're buying it for somebody else as a gift, and you will have it tomorrow. If not, give me a wee shout. But yeah, there's also some concerns coming in and around where we are with the contract, Ange, and I wanted to talk a wee bit about that as well. So what is the philosophy, Ange Postecoglou? Well, he was asked the question because as soon as he comes into Celtic, people are on Amazon, Colin, trying to buy his book, this book, and he talks about obviously his background. He talks about the fact that he was a Greek immigrant coming to Australia, and a lot of Celtic fans can relate to that with our Irish heritage and the Irish diaspora that came over 1840s onwards. The potato famine playing a massive part in that, with the amount of displaced immigrants coming out of Ireland and coming to Scotland and going to America, etc., and other places in the UK. And I think that there's that connection and that understanding. So when I start hearing Ange talking about that, you ask yourself, well, is this man the perfect candidate for a job? Because he gets it. Now, we're saying all this with hindsight. There was a lot of unsure Celtic fans when Ange Postecoglou was given the job. And I think my exact comment was, it's a £60 million gamble. That's what I said at the time. Never wrote him off because I wasn't educated enough in Ange Postecoglou and his football career to write him off. But I think that at the time, the way the club were conducting themselves, Colin, around about the appointment of the manager, that was what was the biggest concern at that time, wasn't it? It wasn't so far as, and this isn't me backtracking, this isn't the meme of Homer going back into the hedge here. This is me actually saying I think it was an issue we had with the club and the way they went about their business, rather than a specific attack on Ange Postecoglou and his capabilities.
What you mentioned earlier on about Callum McGregor saying there was no game plan last season, that the boys just went out and tried to win the game the way that they knew, not the way that they were coached and not the way that they were sort of trained to do so. We could see that as a fan base last year. It wasn't as if it was just something that the players could pick up on. We saw that. So when it came to the point of we're talking about getting a new manager and getting a brand new philosophy, because this was a new chapter in Celtic's history. The 10 in a row didn't happen. It left, it gone. That story's over. You've turned the page onto this new chapter, and it was important that when we started this new chapter that we got straight into it and we hit the ground running. And it did feel as if for weeks and weeks, and obviously we went down the Eddie Howe route, and to be honest, I put my full backing behind Eddie Howe because I still do think he's a very good coach. I don't think he's had a great time of it at Newcastle, but I do think he's a good coach. I think he would have done well at Celtic, but the best thing that he's done for Celtic was actually turn down the job, because we've managed to find a manager who, as you say, almost comes part and parcel within what the Celtic philosophy is. He's someone who has no Celtic connections beforehand, but is almost part of the Celtic diaspora. Everything that he is was Celtic, and it just needed the marrying of the two together to understand how perfect the fit was. And since he's came in, he's never shrieked from any sort of responsibility. He's held himself very well with the press. He has been the representative of the club that the fans needed. Last year we were asking, where was the board? Where were people coming out and backing the Celtic support? And just done that at every single opportunity this season. And you hear it from the players as well. After the game against Rangers the other week, the first thing that was said was, what an atmosphere. And that was before the guys even broke down the game. They were asked about the performances, and the first thing they did was thank the fans. Now, I know certain fans don't appreciate the fact that after every game this season, there's almost been this sort of lap of honour, to use the many air quotes. It's not a lap of honour. It's an appreciation for the fans that have travelled all over Scotland to support their team. And we spoke about it last year because the fans weren't in. The fans can be that 12th man. The fans can urge that ball in the net against Dundee United. The fans can get right behind you and drive the team on. And the players appreciate that. Ange appreciates that. And he did say something earlier on in the season, and it was at one of the press conferences where he says, I don't deserve the love and appreciation that's been shown to me by the Celtic support so far. I've done nothing, I've won nothing to prove it. Well, he's now won the League Cup. He's turned the team and the form around from earlier on in the season, where we all agreed he needed a bit of time to bed the team in. And if he's to go on and win another the Cup, the League, whatever it is that he ends up with this season, he will definitely be the manager to lead us next year into whatever competition we're in and with whatever silverware we have behind us, because he is the guy that Celtic fans have totally bought into, no matter how this season finishes. And that is a massive, massive turnaround from where we were at this point last year.
Yeah, we spoke last year, all year, about a disconnect, Colin. And a massive part of that was we weren't at the games. I totally get that. But there seemed to be a disconnect between the fans and the manager of the football team and the fans and the board. There was a complete disconnect there. And I think what Ange has brought in is an understanding of what it means to support Celtic, what it means to play for Celtic, represent Celtic. And I go back to it. He was asked a brilliant question in one of the early press conferences by a fan media representative, and I apologise because I can't remember who asked the question, but they had obviously done the research and read his book, and he was speaking about how his family obviously had fled Greece and gone to Australia. So to understand the makeup of the team that he joined when he was in Australia, South Melbourne, and the fact that was very much, in terms of the fan base, there was a huge amount of the Greek diaspora as part of the fan base at that football club. So you can imagine that there's these people coming over on the boat, and it's a bigger journey, obviously, from Greece to Australia than it is from Ireland to Scotland. So it was a long time in terms of the travel, with no real idea of what was going to be happening once you got there. And then there's a football club that draws the Greek immigrants together. So it was almost a community at the weekend to go and watch this football club. Lo and behold, you start looking at some of the players that they were bringing in, and they were Greek, Australian players. And obviously part of that, the makeup of that, was Ange Postecoglou. He went on to captain the club. So I think the deep-rooted understanding of what Celtic means to guys like you and me, and what Celtic means to a huge amount of people, the Irish diaspora included, all around the world, I think that's important. And if you bring in someone who might be a checkbook manager or a high-profile manager from elsewhere, it's unlikely they're going to get that. And now, I'm not saying it's a prerequisite that you need to have that to be the Celtic manager, Colin. But after the disconnect last season, I think it was extremely important to bring somebody in who was able to connect with the fans and knew what turned us on and what pushed our buttons, because that's exactly what he's done since he's come in. But he's done it in an understated way. It's not as though he's looked for an opportunity in a press conference, Colin, to bring all this up. He's only done it when pressed by fan media or the mainstream media in relation to his own background. And I think that connection is what we lost last year. And I think that is a massive part of the success and the feel-good factor and the momentum that we seem to have as fans. Is it more enjoyable to be coming onto ACSOM this season than it was last, Colin?
100%. 100%. I mean, that's easy enough to say when you're winning games. But there was even sometimes last season where it was good to come on when you just needed to get that off your chest, because a massive part of last season was that there was no chance for you to go to the pub. There was no supporters clubs. There was no travelling to the games where everybody likes to get their frustration out and everybody likes to have their say. There was none of that last year, and I think everybody who is joining us this evening in the comment section, obviously a warm welcome. They all enjoyed that fact, and there's people that have made friendships in the comment section that never knew each other 12 months, 18 months ago, because they needed an outlet to go and speak to what was happening on the park, because for a lot of people it goes life, work and Celtic, and sometimes not in that order. Some people have Celtic very, very at the top at number one, and everything else is second nature. And look, I know a lot of people who suffered very badly with mental health during the lockdowns. And there was a point where I saw someone a couple of weeks ago saying, when they talked about potentially having no fans in the stadium again, sorry, apologies, that there should be looked into the idea of mental health support for fans who had not been in the stadium, and the amount of people that mocked it. I know there's a woman that's in my Celtic supporters club in Greenock who, she doesn't have a husband, she doesn't have kids, she has family that she sees very few. Well, she sees them more often now, but her life was going to work and then going to watch Celtic. And when that makes up such a big part of your life and that's taken away from you, the impact that has on you is horrendous. So now seeing her happy at the fact that she's going to all these games, I don't think everybody fully appreciates what happened last year. And it'll be something that we all look back on in maybe 5-10 years' time, and maybe only then start to fully understand what happened. Yeah. So now that we're back at the games, as you say, Ange Postecoglou comes along, he brings this feel-good factor along. It was so easy to get carried away at first, but now you're seeing the materialism put down in front of you. Now you're seeing the fans that last year were saying, I don't have any connection to this club. They're starting to build it again. They're starting to come back in their droves. I'm not saying they would ever have left the club, but they were always felt distant because the club had no connection to them. Now it's starting to piece itself back together, and a lot of that is down to Ange Postecoglou, and a lot of that, as you look at the squad, bringing guys in from Israel, bringing guys in who were on their last chance at Spurs, bringing guys in who were out of the blue at other clubs. He's given everybody a fresh chance. He's given everybody as much opportunity as possible. And this is the right start to the new chapter in Celtic's history. Yeah,
no, you're right. And it is, a lot of this is obviously with the benefit of hindsight. You react to the moment. You react to the disappointment of Celtic going down a process, and for that process to fall down at, the last hurdle after the disappointment of the previous season. And there's a huge amount of disappointment at that time. And I think it would have been easy to pull out a name, a profile name at that point, Colin. The panic would have been pull out a high profile name, get them in, and that's the way to go. But you know what? I don't know who within Celtic came up, who was the first person that came up with the idea of Ange Postecoglou, but I would like to know at some point. I'm sure that will come out in time, the circumstances behind it. But I'd love to know how someone was able to identify this individual who had a similar background in terms of the immigration of him and his people to a different land, and he's spoken about it passionately, who had a philosophy that matched the Celtic way, which may become or has already become a cliche, but we know what that is, the romantic notion that we play entertaining football. No matter who we play, as the previous commenter said, Ridiculizer, we can go into a European game, Colin, against a very good Betis side and play the same way that we do when we play Motherwell at home or away. And as you say, some people might think that's naive, but if you get everybody up to that point where they understand the game plan and the quality improves, which it has undoubtedly done this season, then why not play your game and let them concern themselves with Celtic's master plan and game plan? Now, the holy goalie comes in, and I think this is a very important point. There he is with the avatar of the big man. When do you think the club should be looking to tie Ange down on a longer-term contract? If we want to try and keep some of these players, then keeping the gaffer will give us the best chance. Now, there's no doubt, Colin, that a few of those players are there primarily because of Ange Postecoglou. Mm-hmm. I mean, the obvious four would be the Japanese players that he either worked with or had a knowledge of in the Japanese league. So you're looking at this clutch of players that we brought in who are all looking a bit special. You're looking at a couple of the guys that Ange has reinvigorated, and you're looking at Ange himself and what he can achieve at Celtic with his ambitions. And at the moment, unless anyone in the comments field wants to tell me different, I believe Ange is on a one-year rolling contract, as previous managers have been. It's a normal thing at Celtic over the last few managers. What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on tying Ange down so that it gives him maybe more of an indication of our belief in him on a more kind of medium term rather than a short term?
I think Ange is the man that would resolve that. I think if Ange wants a 4-year deal, he'll get a 4-year deal. If he wants a 5-year deal, he'll get a 5-year deal. I think he might be quite comfortable with the 12-month rolling contract as it is, because as horrible as it is to say, there will be a time when Ange Postecoglou is not the Celtic manager, and that could be down to his own aspirations, or it could be down to things not going the way it should have went. There's only really two ways that you leave the Celtic post. It's either that a big team down south, now I say a big team, nobody's really bigger than Celtic, are they? Let's be honest, but a more financially successful team down south or abroad come in with a package which is probably one that the club can't turn down. It's what happens to the players, it's what happens to managers as well, and they move on to pastures new, and most of the time they move on with our blessing. Other times it's because of the lack of success on the park. Mm-hmm. And to me, there is only kind of two ways this is going to go, unless, and again, maybe it's because it's the way that I've been brought up, because all I've seen is from the sort of, I'd say, Dr. Joe era, Wim Jansen era onwards, where we've changed managers quite frequently. Yeah, that just seems to be the way it went. You go back probably over time, the likes of Jock Stein and Willie Maley and guys like that who could manage for 13, 14 years at a time, and their job was never in doubt because that's the way it was back then. But in modern football, you just don't get that. So you're not going to see a Sir Alex Ferguson dynasty. You're not going to see someone like Postecoglou last as long as Arsene Wenger does. A manager's shelf life is usually between probably 3 and 4 years, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happens at Celtic. But for that to be the case, and Celtic want him to sort of tie himself down, it does make sense to give him a sort of 4 or 5 year deal, because if someone comes knocking at the door, then you've got the sort of backing behind that as well. It's a difficult situation for clubs to find themselves in. You could find yourself in a situation where in 12 months' time everything goes to pot and you've still got 3 or 4 years of a contract to pay off. It's understandable to see why a 12-month contract suits both teams. I don't think it's as insecure having 12 months on a deal as what it is having 3-4 years on a deal, because you've saw what Celtic managed to get for players that only had 12 months on a deal there in the summer. There's still big money in it. It all comes down to whoever holds the contract at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally get that. I just think that we have obviously done the due diligence somewhere at Celtic to identify Ange Postecoglou as a candidate 8 months ago. Would love to know who it was. Obviously, 2 former chief executives have tried to take some credit for that so far, Colin. We'll find out who it was in the fullness of time, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm not getting completely overwhelmed by the fact that we're sitting top of the league, because as Tommy Roddick says, we've been top of the pile for a decade, mate. So I'm cool with that. However, I am seeing a lot in Ange that I think matches what Celtic are all about, what the fan base are all about. And, you know, he's not a particularly old manager. He's 56 years of age, Colin, and you think to yourself, you don't know what his aspirations are in terms of post-management, but we talk about there being a restructure of a football department and there perhaps being someone upstairs with a football brain, you know, a director of football or whatever the title may be. And you look at somebody like Ange with the philosophy and the mindset and you think, well, would you be happy with an up-and-coming gaffer working under his tutelage? And at this moment in time, you've got to say, yeah, you would. You absolutely would be happy with that. Bazaboy82, absolutely love that photo. Is that Strawberry Fields? I don't know. Let us know, Bazaboy. Good evening, lads. Loving the new flag in the background. So do we, Bazaboy. We love it as well. All the way from Australia. Hey, by the way, if anyone wants to send us nice Celtic stuff, feel free to do it. We've got a brilliant T-shirt through the post last week from one of the up-and-coming artists that came in to do a session, Colin, PG Chiarletta. Good Celtic man as well. And if you want to send stuff into the studio, I'm all for that, absolutely. We've got a message coming in from Facebook. Factual content is paramount. ACSOM always delivers. Yes, I think everybody should remember that there is a difference between perception and facts, and there is also a difference between what people say on social media, Colin, about certain people and certain platforms and what is actually true. So keep a wee open mind about there being 2 sides to every story, ladies and gents. Now, Paddy Lavery, good evening, Paul and Colin. Do you boys not go out? Well, when there's a 6 o'clock show, who do you call? There's it's like an ACSOM kind of bat phone. Colin, give me a hand. Let's get this show done. Scott, how? Well, this is different. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is absolutely right.
I've got to say, if you're not out by 6:30, it doesn't mean you're not out at all. Put it that way. The night's still young.
Well, Colin, I don't know about you. You've got a kind of more thriving social life than I. I do tend to spend 95% of my time in the studio, and that's just the way it is. Patrick Murphy, the thing about Ange is that he's so likeable and tells it like it is. That's refreshing. I loved Lennon, but he's always quick to pass the blame. Ange Postecoglou has been a breath of fresh air, and he's building a squad worth millions. Now, that's an interesting point as well. We're going to talk about the Aberdeen game, the form that Celtic are showing at the moment, and the fact that we're going into the Scottish Cup against Wraith Rovers. But when you look at some of the players, Colin, and the likes of Matt O'Reilly, and Rio Atati, and you look at their transfer fees, Joe Hart, you can throw Joe Hart into that mix as well. And you look at the transfer fees that we're paying for these players, it's frightening. I mean, let's start off with Joe Hart. You've already mentioned him, and we're going to be talking about a proposed lineup for Wraith Rovers, and we'll dip back in into what happened against Aberdeen. But there you've got a man in Joe Hart. How many fans, not just Celtic fans, how many football fans had a perception of Joe Hart as an individual?
Plenty.
You know? Aye.
Plenty.
And he's come into this club. And I mean, I don't know if it's with age that, he's mellowed out, or a lot of people had the wrong perception of him, but he seems to get what this club is all about as well, Colin. Every time he gets interviewed, he speaks so highly of Celtic Football Club, the standards, what he's here to achieve. A lot of these players who have made a lot of money down south, they see maybe Celtic is going out to grass, like an old racehorse that's past its best. Mm-hmm. Joe Hart has not approached this in any way, shape or form like that, has he?
No. And to be honest, Joe Hart's still young for a goalkeeper. Mm-hmm. He's 34, 35. He could go on. We take a look at McGregor across the city. He's only just turned 40. And arguably he's had some of his best seasons, maybe not this year, but over the last couple. Joe Hart doesn't get 70-odd caps for England just being a decent goalkeeper. You get 75 caps for England for being a very good goalkeeper. Mm-hmm. You get the amount of appearances that he had in Europe for Man City by being a very good goalkeeper. But what he needed was someone to rebuild his love for football. You could see it when he went to Rome. He was okay. He struggled to settle in over there, which is understandable. You see amount of kind of UK-based players going abroad, and they don't find that connection that they had with the fan base that they had back at their old club. He went to Spurs. He was third choice goalkeeper. Throwing a goalkeeper in out of the blue, you see what happens now and again. I'm always reminded of Mark Brown's performance up at the Tulloch Stadium where we threw the league away that day when he was thrown in out of the blue. The thing with Joe is Joe needed to find a club that was there for him and he was there for them. He could be that kind of hero that the club needed. And hero's probably a big term, but the amount of saves he's made this season and the amount of points he's probably won us, right up until the point over the last maybe not this week, but the week before and before that as well, he could have probably got his deck chair out for 45 minutes for the first half of games. But he is someone who loves football, and you can see the relationships he's building with the team. I don't know if you saw the celebration between himself and Jota yet.
Yeah.
The
worst part about it is the referee trying to spoil everything for everybody, you know? It's always the same.
Started on referees, we'll be here for another hour. He is showing that ability that, okay, he's not the vice-captain, Near Beaton's the vice-captain, but if there was ever a point where the armband had to be passed on to Joe Hart, then I fully believe and I would fully back him to give the instructions throughout the team, to organise the team as much as possible and to stand up for every single one of his players. I can see him doing a 30, 40-yard run to try and pull a Ideguchi or a Matt O'Reilly off of somebody if they put a bad tackle in, just to protect his own players. That's the kind of guy that we need. And if Beaton's to move on, if McGregor's to get injured, he is captain material and he's only been here 6-7 months.
Yeah, and not one person would complain about it, Colin. No. You know, the captain's armband, it's one of these things that it's sacred. All football clubs, you don't just throw it about willy-nilly. But however, when a player comes in and he's been in the door 7 months, and you're quite happy that, you know, if Callum McGregor wasn't playing, for him to be given the handbag, no, the armband, then, you know, you would be quite happy that it shows the impact that he's made in such a short space of time. 27, welcome to the show. You're watching on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, get subscribing. I can guarantee you we have got massive content coming over the next 6 months. Do you need to get the contacts in, mate? Is that you trying to read a comment on the screen?
I was trying to look at the car there.
You having a look at the car?
I thought it was a Mitsubishi Evo. I'm not 100%.
I couldn't tell you. I'm not into cars at all. 27, I can see, I'm sick of writing them off, you see. I can see Ange winning a treble in his first season. A quadruple. Becoming the first manager to do so. How's the weather in Albania come May? Wee bit tongue-in-cheek, I know. But we were talking about this on Thursday. Brian joined JP and I, and we spoke about how there is this real determined focus in Ange, whereby he goes into every game believing he can win it. So he may have this ambition that come the 25th of May, he's going to be leading Celtic out to a European final. Now, that's Hollywood stuff. That's fairy tale stuff. You know, particularly when you look at the state of the club when he came in and what he's had to do to get to this stage. But, you know, I'm pretty sure, what I will say about that, Colin, is I'm pretty sure Ange believes himself that he could win a European trophy with Celtic. Maybe not in the first season. That's something that has been off the table for several seasons. Progress in Europe. And I've said a few times that every time I come into a new season as a Celtic supporter, I want Celtic to win the league. I don't expect anything, but I want Celtic to win the league. I want Celtic to win at least one domestic cup. And I want us to be in Europe after Christmas. That's always my expectations in terms of my goals as a Celtic fan. And at the end of the season, you look back on it and you ask yourself how well we've done. I mean, what about yourself coming into this season? Kevin Graham was talking about being within touching distance of the leaders by Christmas. And I just kept saying, no, we can't allow that to happen. We need to win the league. We need to win the league. What were your expectations at the beginning of this season?
So my expectations were that Celtic would definitely close what became, out of nowhere, a massive gap. That 25 points last year. the rebuild that we needed at the start of the season was absolutely incredible. And you take a look at the team that played against Rangers the other week, and only 2 of that starting 11 were actually there last season. That's how much of a rebuild that we've had to do in the last 6 months. I was content at finishing second at the start of the season as long as we were pushing for it. I understand that there's such a big prize on offer this year, with the winners going straight into the Champions League group stages. I just wanted us to be far more prepared than what we usually are, and I wanted the sort of rebuild to be, if not complete, in the final stages. Now we're kind of looking at it with 12 games to go, and you're thinking, you know what, there's a real serious possibility here that the rebuild isn't as far on as what we thought it was going to be, but the progress has been, it's surpassed what anybody could imagine. And we just, the way that we have approached these games over the last sort of, I don't know, what has it been now, 14 without defeat, something along them lines, since the Livingston game basically, where we just treat every minute, every game as 90 minutes. And that's a really good approach to have. And I think with that approach, it means that you're not looking at it and you're saying, we're 1 point clear with 12 games to go. You're looking at it and you're going, if we win 12 games, we'll win the league. And I'd rather we looked at it like that than the way that we kind of look at the tables. And Ange just said that himself. He says, well, you get nothing for being top in October, you get nothing for being top in December. And even when we went top, you get nothing for being top in February. It all comes down to where we finished at the end of the season. If we take each game, game by game, and play the best that we can, all you have to do is win them. And it sounds so simple, but we say this when we're 7 points behind. We said it when we were a couple of points behind, and I'm saying it when we're ahead. Treat each game as 90 minutes and try and win that 90 minutes regardless of who's in front of us. And that's the way I think Postecoglou's tried to play. This goes back to the style and the philosophy that we spoke about earlier. He has a plan A. He will play to plan A. And his way to improve that is to play plan A better. And it has worked so far. So,
or replace players within that plan with better players.
Yeah.
So the plan works better. And I think that's the biggest part. You know, he's played the same way since day one. But what he's done, Colin, is he's replaced the players that couldn't fit that kind of model. Now, Feed the Bear, welcome to the show. Feed the Bear, what a tremendous avatar that is. And what amazes me about that centenary season, Colin, is that Roy Aitken was about 27 or something in that image, and he looks like, you know, a wee bit older. Feed the Bear, Neil Lennon, or Lenny. For all his faults that season, was no just to blame Kennedy, Strachan and the board took the cheap option. They knew about the 10 and will never be forgiven. Lenny, legend. There will come a point where, you know, and I think success obviously softens your kind of view of a lot of things, Colin, but there is going to come a point, of course there is, when Neil Lennon will be welcomed back to Celtic Park. I'm not being naive to believe that. I mean, next year is the 20th, it's been 20 years since Seville next year. I'm pretty sure there will be loads of different celebrations, even though, it was a defeat. And we're not meant to celebrate defeat. But when you look at the actual achievement and the run and the journey that we went on to get to Seville in 2003, there will be events and players will get together. Well, you can't do that without Neil Lennon. Neil Lennon will come back. He will be accepted back. It might take some time. He took a massive part of the brunt of a lot of the Celtic fans' stick, from ACSOM included. But I think we understand that there was a huge amount of people who were responsible for last season, Colin.
He's not the only one to carry the sword, but he is the one who's fell on it. That's the way it kind of looks at it this year, because there was a lot of things that went wrong last year, and it's still quite raw to look back on it, especially with the success that we've had this year. So I'm still very angry at some of the things that Neil Lennon did last year, and it will take a long time for some of his comments since to sort of die down, and maybe I'll look back on it. But for me, he was just the wrong person at the wrong time at Celtic Football Club. His time had come to an end, and we kind of tried to get one more year out of it. And we saw what happened when we didn't properly give it the right go. And what happened. Speaking about 20 years since Seville, right? We want to bring up a story that Alan Thompson said when he was down in the Greenock CSC a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure if he mentioned it on the great interview that you done.
You tell me you've not watched my interview?
I've not seen all of it yet. Paul, you put out that much content, and the guys that have got all this time to watch it, I'm jealous of them. I've got a flight coming up in a couple of days' time. I'll try and download some of it to watch on that.
Good man.
But he spoke about Bobby Petter when he signed for Celtic. He was watching the 6-2 game because it was just before he signed for Celtic, and he's watching Bobby Petter, and Bobby Petter's running wild down the left-hand side, and he makes Rickson goes off at half-time because of how well Bobby Petter had played that game. So he gets into the changing room, and every time he goes in, Bobby Petter is wearing Prada because he's made the big move up from Ipswich to Celtic. He's earning the money, he's wearing Prada all the time. So eventually his nickname in the Celtic team becomes Bobby Prada. And then they leave, and they've not seen each other for about 10, 15 years, and both Petter and Thompson meet up at this Celtic event down south, and Tomo goes, "Oh, Bobby, you're looking rough. What's happened?" And he's like, "Oh, had a divorce, been paying the child maintenance and all that. I've just can't quite afford it anymore." He's like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm the same. I've had the same. This is my new wife, blah, blah, blah." And he kind of looks him up and down, and he's like, "Oh, Bobby, you're not Bobby Prada anymore." And he goes like, "No, I found a new shop. I'm Bobby Zara." He's head to toe in Zara clothes. So he's went from Bobby Prada to Bobby Zara.
They do nice leather jackets in Zara. So there you go.
You know that, Paul.
Yeah, well. Scott Howe, welcome back to the show, Scott. I don't know how this guy ended up at Paradise, but it's probably the best thing to happen to Celtic since Martin O'Neill. Listen, when Brendan Rodgers came in, we were all happy about that as well, weren't we? I mean, let's not deny it. We were all happy when Brendan Rodgers came in. The other night, the Aberdeen game, Colin, obviously I'm in the studio, and Ewan Boy Martin, who is a regular commenter on, like you say, he's part of that community that's been built up over the period. So he was in doing the game with me, and we were talking about Brendan Rodgers coming in. And again, it's easy with hindsight to say this sign was there or that sign was there. And there's a few things obviously happened with Brendan Rodgers that you can look back on now and say, well, that was pretty clear. But one thing I did notice on the day that he was unveiled, Colin, and I never wanted, how could you possibly say it when there's 14,000 Celtic fans in the stadium? It's getting streamed onto Celtic TV, it's all over the socials and everything else, and we are unveiling Brendan Rodgers. But when he came out to the park and he started doing that with his scarf, and I remember seeing him doing that thinking, we don't do that.
No.
Celtic fans don't do that with their scarves. You know, that's never really been a thing in my lifetime. Somebody might tell me previous to me going to watch Celtic. And I thought, does he really know Celtic if he thinks that's the way that we... Anyway, it was a tiny wee thing, and I never mentioned it at the time, obviously, because everybody would have called you all sorts. But Stuart Miller comes in. Are these Friday Night Lives new, or am I just living under a rock for ages? No, Stuart, you never know. We might go with the impromptu streams from time to time, depending on the circumstances and availability of contributors such as Colin Watt. But we are concentrating a massive amount of time on fully produced content. Colin spoke about the interview that we did with Alan Thompson down in Manchester. So there's a lot more content coming out, as well as the daily streams that we do on a regular basis. And Fat Boy Slim, Big Ange dictates the press now. They think twice when they ask questions. Now, Colin, you have done, I don't know how many, probably over a dozen press conferences for a Celtic State of Mind. Have you done Ange yet?
Yeah.
You've done Ange.
Yeah.
How? Talk us through your emotions. What do you do differently going into a press conference with Ange Postecoglou?
A lot of research, because there's a lot of questions that you've not. I mean, you watch these press conferences, and if it's not Ange, it's whoever it is, and it's always the same. Tough result at the weekend, Dex. How's it going to go? Bouncing back on Saturday? Yep. Anybody fit for the game? Who's not fit? Blah, blah, blah. Right, okay. But with Ange, it's because he's got such a massive footballing brain, you want to pick out wee tidbits from it, and you want to kind of dig deeper into the person more than what's happening on the park, because there'll be a reason to what's happening on the park from the man himself. And these people, it's like, at the start of the season, the guy comes in and goes, so what do you know about Hearts? And he's like, look, I'm not living on Mars, mate. I know who Hearts are. He must have coached a couple of them when they had the Australian players in that made it into his Australian national team. There was just such a naivety from the Scottish press at the time. And look, I go back to this, and I don't want to give this guy credit, but at the start of the season, on the fan media press conference, someone said that the Scottish press weren't going to be the most welcoming to Ange Postecoglou. Now, that is the bit that I agree with him at. He went on to go on a complete wild madman rant after that, but that point was proven right. The Scottish press are uncomfortable with the way that Ange Postecoglou treats them and tend to spend as little time as possible with them. My experience of Ange Postecoglou is, if you offer him an insight or you ask a sincere question, he'll give you as much time out of his day to answer back to it. I asked him at the time, it was just before the winter break, and I asked him that basically this was stage one of the rebuild complete. We'd got some of the players in. What was the focus for his stage two of the rebuild? Did it come down to recruitment? Did it come down to the likes of, we'd just brought in Anton McElhone at the time. Where was his focus on for part two? And he says it's already underway. It was on recruitment. It was about getting people in behind the scenes that he could trust, that he could rely on. He was going to change the whole scouting department. He was going to do X, Y, and Z. And his words were, I am going to have a team that is ready for the start of next season before this one's out. And by January, we'd already signed, December 28th, 29th, we'd already signed 3 players. He's a man of his word, and he's an intelligent man. The way that the Scottish press treat him is ridiculous. And he comes for a fight with them. If they say something stupid to him, he'll just give them it straight back. And they're not used to that, and they don't like it.
I think it's one of these things with regards to the way that managers are questioned, particularly when it's over a dialing, with regards to being in the press room. I'm sure it's different. And it's a wee bit kind of like sterile, I think, the environment. And, we've said so many times on this particular show, Colin, how many people are good within the Scottish journalism. And there's no getting away from it, But there are obviously some where it would appear that Ange is quite wary of them. And I think that there's been some unnecessary assessments of him prior to allowing him to get on with the job. And then since then, this constant questioning of the philosophy. And I think that when the fans ask him questions, it's often solely from, in fact, I would say it is solely from a Celtic perspective in terms of what's best for the club. And I think that a lot of the people who are not in the Celtic fan media world who are asking them questions are maybe looking for a different narrative. But that's journalism. That's journalism, But if they do that without the respect that Ange is due, that's when I've got an issue. And that goes without saying for anything and anybody, as long as they show due respect. I mean, some of the comments that were made by prominent broadcasters around Ange Postecoglou were embarrassing. There was one, I'm not going to say which radio station it was on, you'll be able to guess, but obviously the co-presenter that day was McCoist. And the comments that were getting made about Ange Postecoglou by a so-called Celtic fan were ridiculous. And I've had people saying, you should apologise to Ange because you wrote him off. And I didn't ever write Ange Postecoglou off. When we lose 3 out of 6 league games, you're quite concerned. And you're normally commenting, Colin, right after the game that you've lost. So, yeah, there was huge concerns at that stage. At no point have I ever said, get rid of him or this isn't working. But some pundits did say that. So I think that, if they go back and watch their own shows back, then they might feel a wee bit embarrassed. Maybe they won't.
I think what you've got with that particular radio station that you're referring to is they are shock jocks. They just come up with headlines and it starts debate. And to be honest, anybody who is associated with them or anyone who listens into them, maybe have a wee look at your situation and just think, how many times have they actually tried to do proper journalism and actually take a look at who funds them before you maybe give them your time?
No, good shout. Now, Les Watts, honestly, when I heard who was taking the job, I told anyone who would listen that everything would turn out fine. The way that we dealt with it was to speak to people who were better informed than we were, who were less ignorant than we were in relation to Japanese football, Australian football, and Ange Postecoglou. So we invited people onto the show, Colin, to educate us on the man, on his philosophy, on his style of play. And that's exactly what they've done. And I've got to say, as I'm sitting here right now, 8 months down the line, and we don't know how the season is going to end up, like you say. I'm an optimistic type of guy at the best of times, but I have fully bought in to Ange Postecoglou and what he's doing at Celtic. We're going into this game on Sunday, and he's previously said that he doesn't rest players. That was one of the questions recently that he just batted right back, and it was like, was it you're going to rest Tom Rogic? Yeah. And no. You don't get a rest. You'll get a rest at the end of the season like everybody else. So with that in mind, I'm going to run through the team that I expect to start against Raith Rovers. Let me know if there's been any injury updates that I've maybe missed, because as I say, this was an impromptu bulletin and we weren't expecting it. But I would start with Joe Hart in goals. Colin, Juranovic back from his illness?
No.
So he's out? Yeah. So it must be COVID then?
It looks like it.
Yeah. Ralston at right back?
Yeah.
CSC, right, Ralston. Taylor at left back. Listen, I'm going to go for Starfelt and Cameron Carter-Vickers. Okay. I mentioned on Thursday that if I was going to make any changes unforced, it would be to bring in Liam Scales and play him in his preferred position to see how he suited alongside Cameron Carter-Vickers. McGregor, I'm sticking with Hatate and Rogic, which might be controversial because obviously O'Reilly's not in there. And then I would go Abada, Giakoumakis and Jota. That's how I would line up, Colin. Is there any in there that you would disagree with?
I think Christopher Julian will play. I think it's about time that we see where he actually is in terms of his recovery. When you look at the team that actually played Raith earlier on in the season, it was a very strong team considering who was available. So I don't think there'll be wholesale changes. He did mention that Ideguchi would be available and in the squad, so I don't know if that'll be from the bench or starting. Look, I think there will be... I'll go with 4 changes because that seems to be what we make. I think Bain will probably start in goal. I think we'll see Ralston at right back, Carter-Vickers alongside Julian, and probably Liam Scales will get another start. I think McGregor will get rested. I think Beaton will come in alongside O'Reilly, and I'd be half tempted to rest Hatate as well, although that does take me up to the 4 changes already. So I'll stick with Hatate, Jota, Abada, and Maeda.
Where's Giakoumakis, mate?
I think he'll get time, but I think Maeda needs a goal. I know he scored against Motherwell. Was it much of a goal? I think he needs
some chip.
Was it a chip? I mean, that was a Carlton Cole versus Inverness Cali goal. Yeah. I think we do. I think he needs a couple of goals, and this game against Raith is maybe the best chance for it. Look, one thing I did realise before I came on here, and I'm actually annoyed that I'm going to the game now because I've spent my money, but David Goodwilly's still not been released by Raith Rovers.
No.
And they are going to be getting... If Celtic Park's half full on Sunday, which it does look as if it's not too far greater than that, they're going to be getting somewhere in the region of £200,000 to £300,000 off Celtic for this game, including TV money. Where is that money going? That money's going to pay off his contract that they have stupidly picked up. To me, this only just clicked today. If we'd seen this maybe a couple of weeks ago, I wonder what the crowd would have actually been on Sunday.
Well, if you change your mind, get yourself into the studio and join me for the game, Colin. Kieran, 1888, I mean, Aussie flag up for a show at 3 or 4 a.m. in Oz. They're dedicated followers of the show, mate. They're going to get up at 3 or 4 o'clock to watch, especially how we've never even announced it. So I'm sure they'll be okay watching it on the catch-up. The DJ of choice has been feeling a little bit under the weather. He's got a cold. Hopefully you will be feeling better soon. As Colin coughs and splutters his way through valiantly. And there's a question kicking about here from Terence Pat. Let's have a look. Terence Pat, do you think Abada will go to the EPL in the summer? Well, I hope not. I think he's a player that would need to look at his own progression. And I'm pretty sure there will be English clubs not only looking at Abada, but looking at various other players. You look at the performances of O'Reilly, Hatate, Kyogo. I'm pretty sure there'll be a few clubs interested in Jota who haven't tied down yet, as far as I know. So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be interest, Terence. Or is it Pat? However, I don't think it would be the right time for him to go.
No.
And I don't think, although Colin's going to fill us in on some financial info in a wee second, I don't think Celtic would be under any pressure to sell any of the aforementioned players who have come in and doubled, trebled, quadrupled their values, in a short space of time. So there'll be interest, absolutely, but it would be far too early for him and his own progression, Colin, for him to move for Celtic, I think. Yeah,
and I think he's still settling in Glasgow, to be perfectly honest. I've seen some of the stuff that both him and his girlfriend have posted on social media, and I think they're still settling in Glasgow. He's not going to be somebody that makes that move right away. He's found a home at Celtic Park as Juddy comes in. Does Colin Watt ever stop? Guy's been everywhere today. He's just delighted that he got to ask Fran Alonso a question before I did, because I usually steal his questions. No, he's here for another couple of years at least. I think he's found somewhere where he's loved. He loves playing for Celtic. You can see that if anybody's got him on TikTok. One of the last videos he posted was him scoring, playing as himself on FIFA, scoring a last-minute winner for Celtic. The man's loving his time at Celtic Park. And with the finances that have just been released in the last sort of hour or so, everything's starting to look up very rosy at Celtic.
Is it rosy enough for us to have an end-of-season party, you and boys asking?
Oh, if only you and boys allowed to come, then that's the only reason we have a party. If no you and boy, no party. Maybe
we should invite everybody that's given us stick over the last couple of years. That would be a good laugh.
You'd need a massive venue for that, Paul.
Just for mine. We've got a bar in the studio.
We do?
We've got a bar in the studio, so after a few drinks, I'm sure it would be very interesting in a state of mind. Anyway, you were going to tell us about the finances, Colin.
Yeah, so the 6-month interim report up to December 31st, 2021, the report has just been released in the last half hour or so. So the key financial items to take out of that for anyone who's interested: revenue has increased by 29.9% to 52.9 million. That's up about 12.2 million from the year before. Profit from trading was 7 million as opposed to a loss of 0.3 million from last summer. The profit from player registrations, that's players that we've moved on in the first 6 months of the year, the last 6 months of the year there, it was £25.8 million, and that's up from 1 million the year before. So that's moves for the likes of Odsonne Edouard, Ryan Christie, players like that. Profit before tax for the 6 months up to December 31st, 2021 was £27.6 million, and that is a turnaround of nearly £33 million, because this time last year we'd lost £5.9 million. That is a massive, massive turnaround. We spent in the summer £16.8 million on the acquisition of player registrations, and at the end of the period of the year ending December 31st, 2021, we had £25.6 million in the bank. That's massive, Paul. I mean, we're talking about a rebuild here, and it's not just a rebuild, it's a rebuild with a profit. You can see now why Ange was given the transfer funds that he was given in the January transfer window, because this is all before that kicks in.
Yeah, because you can see that it's healthy and we can afford to do it. And we're going to win the league hopefully this season. And then obviously we've got the bounty at the end of that as well, Colin. So absolutely, that's all positive. And Joddy has got a question for us. Here we go. Do you think, welcome to the show, Joddy Talks. Hopefully you're well. Do you think Ange is maybe the man to help us keep some of these players who are wanted elsewhere to try and compete in Europe at a higher level? Interestingly enough, Colin and I did a show. This was a while ago, quite a few years ago, actually, when we used to record in Stirling, Colin. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about if Celtic changed their strategy around signings with regards to bringing a player in and moving them on within a period of 3 years for a massive profit, and we were able to retain the core group of players within the 9 in a row era, we would have a team that was capable of doing something in Europe. That was basically what we were throwing out there for debate, wasn't it? And you're looking at a team, that included Fraser Forster, Denayer, Van Dijk, Tierney. I think you had Beaton in it, Edouard and Dembele, and it goes on and on. What a side we would have had. And I think that in order to keep them beyond that couple of years, the 3 years, what you need is you need someone that they believe in, because we're in the world of modern football, Colin, whereby, footballers there is, I'm not going to say every single one of them, but there is an element of the mercenary around modern footballers, and, Celtic being used as a platform to move on elsewhere. And I think that if you believe in the manager and there's a relationship between you and the manager, then that would go some way to building something a wee bit more special. And it might mean that you're staying at the club 18 months longer than some of these star names have done previously. But what you would get as a result of that is you're keeping a team together that's developing and you're constantly improving. 3 years down the line, it would be frightening. If this is what Ange can do in 8 months, Colin, and he's allowed to do it, and we're in good financial health, like you've just explained, what would the team look like in 3 years? And I think that if you're selling that to a player like Abada, let's use Abada because he was brought up, right? 20 years of age, and you're saying you could still go to the very top at 23. You don't have to leave at 21. You don't have to leave at 22, What do you think Ange's part is in that? Does it make a difference to the modern footballer? I think it does.
No, it does. It absolutely does. You take a look at when Brendan Rodgers was in charge, and I've mentioned this on the show before, he wanted to be backed heavily to take Celtic to the next level. He knew there was certain positions which, to be honest, as far as probably this season, we've only just replaced them, and I'm talking about it right back. Celtic were looking to bring in guys like Timothy Castagna. They were looking to bring in a guy called Christian Piscini. And Christian Piscini flew all the way to Glasgow for a deal which was meant to be about, I think it was £6 million. And at the last minute, basically the terms of the deal were all changed and Piscini went elsewhere. So Celtic lost out on that transfer. Brendan Rodgers stayed behind as part of a family trip that he was meant to be going to get the deal done, to show that Celtic were actively going to back him, because at that point, I think it's been widely known, Paul, that he was meant to make his move to China because the money was there for him. But instead, he was getting the backing from the Celtic board. We just spent £7 million on Christopher Julian. We're spending the money on guys like Godson Edouard, and we still needed that sort of final bit to the jigsaw, which was the defence and the right back, which we finally sorted. And I've seen some of the comments on Josip Juranovic. What a fantastic signing he was this summer.
Well, the 2.7 million, you forget. I mean, that's not a big transfer fee.
No, but what you're saying is, if you keep showing that you're willing to back the manager who is bringing you success, then you are going to get guys that are going to hang around and say, do you know what? I can get another year out of this. I can kind of get to the stage where we're getting to the last 16 of Europe. I'm getting more exposure. We're getting X, Y, and Z. Sean Maher comes in to say Neil Lennon signed Julian, not Rodgers. No, you're right. But this is at the time when we were starting to look at spending that sort of money.
Yeah.
We were getting to that stage where it had been before. It was a lot of £2 million on a bio, and we'll risk it and we'll see how far we get. We were starting to commit to this because we started to see the revenue coming back this way as well. if we continue in this trend, and it looks as if we have done so far in Ange Postecoglou, if it comes to the summer, and now I fully believe we've already got a team that would do so much better in the Champions League qualifiers right now than what we could have done at any point going forward, because I don't see anybody leaving in the summer. I think you've started to build a team for the summer already. Mm-hmm. If you had that team this summer, I think there's every chance we could have made the Champions League group stages. I really do. I think you would have got past Midtjylland. I think you would have got past some of the other teams as well. If we wouldn't have got as far as that, it wouldn't have been far off it, put it that way.
Well, we said at the time, because there has been a few occasions over the last few years, Colin, whereby we go into these qualifiers and you know that the team you're playing, when they knock you out, if you were to play them in 6 months' time, you would together. And that's the kind of situation we were in at the moment, looking back on Midtjylland, for example. I'm going to bring this in as well because obviously there's a lot of talk around Kieran Tierney moving on. And if he does move on, it'll be for big, big money. It'll certainly put us in a position to sign a few. But I think there's a few other players that are out there with big percentages on their sell-on fees as well. Colin, Dembele was one of them. I don't know what the scenario was or what our bargaining power was with Edouard, Ayer or Christie, but, in the past we have managed to insert these percentages onto the sell-on. So I'm pretty sure, we will be in a position to buy Jota. And if you're looking at 6 to 6.5 for Jota and 6 million for Carter Vickers, then I think that we've done enough good business with £1.5 million for O'Reilly, just over £1 million for Hart, under £2 million for Hatate, that you can push the boat out for a couple of these guys who, for me, have been absolutely outstanding this season. Colin, this has been an impromptu Celtic State of Mind this evening on a Friday night. Possibly the first time I've done that. Not too sure. We might do it again. It's been quite enjoyable. Yeah. Thanks everybody for getting involved. It's not been as busy as normal because we didn't announce this. We just decided to drop it onto the channel. So thanks for getting involved. I hope you all have a great weekend. We'll be back from half an hour before kickoff on Sunday. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. We have got some massive content coming up. Big interviews, big features, documentaries, and a little bit more than that as well. And thank you once again to Colin Watt for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.